everyone, welcome to Why I Love Between the Buried and Me White Walls Part 5. If this is your first time watching a video, I'm going to let you know that there's some links down in the description, so that way you can skip around, because I'm pretty sure this video is going to be pretty long. If this is the first video that you're watching, I also want to recommend that you start from the beginning in episode 1, just so that way you can understand why I'm doing things the way I'm doing them. I'm sure you'll have some questions as to why I'm using a certain key or tuning or whatever. For continuing on, it's been a while since part 4, so I want to get into this pretty quick because I think this is going to be a pretty long video, so let's get to the playthrough. Okay, so looking at this section, we're coming from these A diminished and F sharp chord stabs. Our A diminished chord stabs are the A power chord with that flat fifth in there. The A diminished makes sense because of our previous use of the F sharp fully diminished 7th chord. F sharp, A, C, and E flat diminished 7 are all the same enharmonic chords. The F sharp major 3rd dyad makes use of the voice leading by half step, from A natural to an A sharp. It's almost like we're changing chord qualities while keeping the same root, like we saw in earlier videos. Another point to make while on the topic of enharmonic equivalence is that A sharp is the same thing as B flat. They're the same note. In the next series of chords, our first chord is a C minor triad. Coming from what was mostly E minor, the C minor chord seems out of place, but makes sense when looking back at the previous measure, having an A diminished 7, F sharp diminished 7 kind of feel. The A diminished 7 chord is the diminished 7 chord from B flat major. B flat's relative minor is G minor, which is our next chord, right after the C minor. These two measures can be seen as kind of in the key of G minor, which is a minor 3rd above our key of E minor. We can also look back at our F sharp major dyad as a G flat dyad because A sharp is the same thing as B flat and F sharp is the same thing as G flat. D flat is not in the key of G minor and isn't in our previous dyad, but if it were, we could see this as a G flat major chord, which would be the flat 5 chord when compared to the C minor. The 1 to flat 5 relationship is a tool that's used in a lot of movie scoring and stuff like that. I think Rick Beato has a video that focuses specifically on John Williams and this technique. He digs into a lot of detail, so I really recommend that video. I'm not going to go into all of that detail because he does a way better job than I will. These major chords are also a tritone apart, which gives this cool, airy, dreamy-like flow to it all. The Petrushka chord was also a tool used in Stravinsky's Petrushka ballet. This chord has the 1 to flat 5 being played simultaneously, so it's a polychord of sorts. Although we're looking at a flat 5 to 1 minor progression, it doesn't seem like much of a stretch to see this in the same way as we would see a 5 to 1 relationship or a 5 to minor 1 relationship. I know that was a lot of information just for 2 measures of music, but I promise we'll use these concepts later in the video. So for example, when we're looking at this flat 5 to 1 relationship, we can kind of get this kind of tone that sounds something like this. Okay, so we've established the C minor, G minor relationship. After the G minor triad, we go to an A diminished or an A flat 5 power chord. which can also be viewed as the way we previously treated the F-sharp fully diminished 7th chord in previous videos. It's also a tritone away from F-sharp G flat from C minor, which we go back to. We seem to be repeating in this section until we get to an A7 chord. We're keeping the same root but changing the chord quality. The A7 leads to an F minor chord, which can also be seen as a D minor 7 flat 5 without the root. I'll make an argument for that later on when we go back to this section at the end. The A and G go to A flat by half step, the C sharp goes to C by half step, and the E goes to F by half step. Half steps usually create a smooth resolution, and it can be seen here with these two chords that don't really share the same key. So the becomes this. And that's all movement by half step, so it's pretty smooth there. This then leads to a D power chord with an A in the bass, an inverted power chord in our next section. So we end up with our C minor, going to G minor. The B flat is in the bass, so we have a C to B flat kind of descending thing. Then we go to that A flat 5, A diminished power chord kind of thing. So we have this in the bass movement. All pretty smooth. Then we go back to that C minor from that A flat 5 thing. From that A flat 5 diminished power chord, we go to A7. That's that kind of modal mixture, chord quality changing kind of concept going on. An A7 going to that D minor 7 flat 5. Or an F minor, however you want to look at it. So we have those previous chord stabs from before going into the main C minor progression. So we have okay, there are a lot of ways to look at this next riff, but I think I want to look at it kind of loosely as in the key of D minor. We have a descending chromatic death metal-y riff that starts on that D5, that D power chord with an A in the bass. The simplest way to look at this would be to pay attention to where the downbeats are. And on those downbeats, we have a D power chord, A power chord, B flat power chord, and a B flat flat 5 power chord. These can all be found in D minor, so it makes sense to look at it in D minor. This, however, does not explain the chords in between or on the upbeats. We could also look at this all as being an E minor, with those first two beats making a B minor 7 chord. Oh, the next dyad can be seen as E sus4, so E and A. Then, just like AC/DC's Thunderstruck, we get a chromatic walk down to our B flat minor 7. So, instead of our Thunderstruck kind of thing, though. So that half-step relationship creates that flat 5 to 1 minor kind of thing that's been going on recently. And we're also using the E sus4 as kind of like a pedal. That leads us into the slidey bit that we previously called that B flat 5 chord. We can also call this an E flat 5 with a B flat in the bass. It kind of resembles our chord changing quality kind of thing from before. However you decide to look at this is a fun and painful riff to play. I actually got injured a few weeks back because I kept practicing this and recording this with no breaks, and ended up getting injured and had to take some time off. Just trying to make you guys happy. Okay, so the next part is a kind of thrashy sounding section that makes a better case for the D minor analysis, because it starts with that B flat 5 power chord. That leads to a C power chord with a G in the bass. These first two chords combine to make a C7 chord, actually. So we have our B flat, E, we have a C, and a G. So we have this. And it's kind of like making this sound. The C7 chord is the major 7 chord in D minor. These next pair of chords combine to make an A minor 7, which is the 5 minor 7 chord in D minor. So we have A and E, and then we have C and G. The following chord is an E flat power chord that can be seen as an E flat 7 chord, which is a tritone substitution in D minor. So we get that E flat 7 chord as a tritone sub. So in a jazzy 2-5-1, you would start on your 2 chord, which would be E minor. Tritone sub, instead of going to A, we would do the tritone sub, which would be E flat 7, before going back to 1. So we would have something like this. Jazzy. So this tritone substitution leads us back to the D5 chord, which is the 1 in minor. So we end up with something that would be like this. That sounds pretty good to me. Okay, the last chord in this measure is the A flat power chord, which is the flat 5 in the key of D minor. So we would have that flat 5 to 1 relationship happening again. So cool. The next measure goes back and forth between E flat, D, and A flat chords, which either have a 5 to 1 relationship, like the E flat to A flat, or a flat 5 to 1 relationship, like the A flat and D. We then get this cool quarter note triplet measure happening. This was a tough one to make sense of, but I see it more like changing chords every 2 quarter note triplet beats instead of as, treating this as 2 beats. So those first 2 notes are A flat and G, and we can kind of see that as an A flat major 7 chord. Our previous A flat power chord doesn't have chord quality because there's no third. So we're kind of doing that changing chord quality concept that we've kind of been seeing before. So it could be, an A flat 7, it could be an A flat minor. So we have that A flat in the bass, so we can kind of just, see it as whatever we need it to be. So A flat major 7 would make sense. That's not too far out there. We can then see the next 2 notes as being part of a G minor 7 flat 5, which is the 7 half diminished chord in the key of A flat. These are the 5th and minor 3rd from the G minor 7 flat 5 chord. And we can see the last 2 notes as being an A chord with the root in the 5th. So we would end up having something like this. That's not too far out there, and that kind of all sounds pretty smooth actually. If we do this, we get some voice leading between all of these. The A flat major 7 would have the A flat going to G by a half step. So we would end up with something like this, which is smooth. The A flat could also go to a B flat too, but half steps are a little bit better. We can also see the C going to a D flat, so then the G would stay the same. If we include a minor 7 in the G minor 7 flat 5, the F could then go to E by half step, so we would have this. The D flat would then stay the same. The D flat is also a C sharp. And then the B flat would go to A by half step. This would then create an A major triad, which is the 5 in D minor. After that, we head back to our death metal-y riff. It should be noted that when this riff first comes out, Tommy says they chose Camilla, which is kind of cool because it references Camilla Rhodes. I believe it's somewhere around here. They do the... And he's like, they chose Camilla. Oh yes, my great singing. Here Tommy says they chose Camilla. And it would be fitting to do a reference to Camilla Rhodes from the Silent Circus song, which references Camilla Rhodes from the movie Mulholland Drive. This sends us down this kind of rabbit hole of BT Bam fanboy thoughts. I want to be brief because I don't want to dig too deep, but Tommy gives his thoughts on the meaning of both songs in interviews if you want to look at them. Generally, White Walls is about artistic integrity and making the music you want to, while not giving into the pressures of the industry and not conforming to anything. This ties into Camilla Rhodes and the music industry focusing on provocative imagery. They, from the song, chose Camilla to dance for them, and BT Bam chose to use Camilla. Camilla from Camilla Rhodes is supposed to be all about the imagery, so it all kind of ties in together. It's also hard to ignore the flat 5 power chord thing that's going on here, which is also done in Camilla Rhodes. It's kind of an Easter egg kind of thing, so in Camilla Rhodes there's this kind of part that just kind of like... So they say they chose Camilla around here, and in Camilla Rhodes we have that same kind of figure just down a string set, so we got... So all of that is pretty cool. Okay, as we keep going along, we see mostly what is a repeat of previous measures. We then get to a measure to set up a triplet figure that's the same thing pretty much, except it's down by a half step. So this measure kind of tries to set things up as in being in the key of E minor or G major, however you want to look at that. We have an E flat going to a D inverted power chord, which then goes into an A flat power chord. We can also see this as a G sharp power chord. Now, if this was a G sharp minor chord, that would be borrowed from E minor's parallel key E major. So we would kind of have this modal interchange thing. So in the key of E major, the 3 chord is G sharp minor. So it's not too far-fetched to kind of be in E minor and borrow from the parallel major key. So it's kind of a modal interchange kind of thing going on here. This makes it a great pivot chord to go to E or E minor. This then leads us into the G power chords, giving us the impression that we are now in E minor or in G major. That then leads us into our triplet figure, which starts off on that G major 7 now, which was previously an A flat major 7. So now in this triplet figure we have G major 7 going to F sharp minor 7 flat 5 going to A flat. This A flat then leads back to our D power chord. This is that flat 5 to 1 relationship that we've seen time and time again going on here. Okay, so in this next section we're going into this cool straight 8th note riff kind of thing that's mostly in D major, with the exception of our Gs and B flats. So if before we were in the key of G, D would be the 5 chord. And modulating to the dominant is something that's been done in, classical music for a long time, so it's kind of ingrained in our ears, so that's not weird at all. So we do see a little bit of modal mixture here because we see the use of B flat in both measures, and the B flat is the flat 5 interval that's been used a lot previously when we were in E minor. We can also see the chord stabs by the rhythm guitar that accents a D inverted power chord in the first measure when the main guitar hits the D the first 2 times. In the second measure, we see an F sharp power chord followed by an F sharp flat 5 power chord, diminished power chord. The C sharp in the F sharp power chord is in line with our modal mixture in the main guitar, followed by a C natural, which is in the key of G. The rhythm guitar then ends the phrase on E flat. So the rhythm guitar is kind of doing this thing. It then goes into our regular F sharp power chord, which then goes into F sharp diminished, then goes to our E minor. This is all stuff we've seen before, the F sharp diminished going to E minor, that kind of thing. We end up with the D being the major 7 chord in E minor, or it can be seen as the 1 in the key of D. If we view it as the 1 in the key of D, the next measure would imply an F sharp minor, which is the minor 3 chord, or we can also see this as a D major 7 chord. This then goes into an implied F sharp diminished 7th chord, which has been used previously to go back to the E minor, and it does. That first measure is mostly D major for the most part, with our root 5th and 3rd on there. We then start on C sharp and do this. that C sharp can be seen as the major 7 in a D major 7 chord. And we have the B flat going to B, which can create that kind of flat 5 to 5, which could then lead us back to E minor. So we could do, and we would have, you know, an actual 5 to 1 relationship. So here we can kind of see the B flat as kind of being, you know, in D minor, or we can kind of see it as, hey, we might go back to E minor, but we don't. Kind of a deceptive kind of quality. So the key ambiguity is cool and creates this lost, dizzying type of effect. The main melody is then harmonized in perfect fourths when the second guitar comes in. In the parallel fourth harmony, we don't see any C sharps, but we do see a D sharp, which is the raised 7th in E harmonic minor. The second guitar part is exactly the same thing as the main guitar part, it just up a string set. So these string sets are tuned in perfect fourths, so this melody is then harmonized in parallel fourths perfectly. After returning to our death melody riff, we then go into a transition measure that outlines an A suspended second chord and a B flat flat 5 chord. So A suspended second and our B flat flat 5 chord. These two chords can also be seen as an E sus4 and E flat flat 5. If we see both of these as E-type chords, we can see this making sense as our changing chord qualities like we've been doing before. So it's all based off of E, but the chord quality is changing. The next measure has the guitars resting, but the bass actually outlines an F sharp diminished 7. So the bass is actually doing something like this, which is the F sharp fully diminished 7 chord. So in doing so, it kind of leads right back into the C minor chord, which has that F sharp fully diminished 7 is kind of like a G flat. Remember, so we have that flat 5 to 1 going on, so we would have, and then the ending, which is, now the only thing that's really different here is the last chord is a D minor chord. So instead of our previous F minor kind of looking thing, we actually have a D minor in first inversion. So that's why I made the reference to the D minor 7 flat 5 in the beginning, just not having a root, because it kind of really actually wants to go to D minor. So the F minor is really more of a D minor 7 flat 5 without the D being included. And that's pretty much it for this episode. Sorry for all the wordiness. Okay, well that's it for part 5. I'm hoping that part 6 will be a little bit shorter and it should be a lot more melodic, so hopefully it'll be easier to work on. This one was pretty long-winded. We got to cover a bunch of advanced techniques like talking about John Williams and movie scoring and use of the Petrushka chord in Stravinsky. I did not think that was going to happen. We went on some wild goose chases with Camilla Rhodes. I'm going to try to make this ending a little short, so please give me a thumbs up and leave a comment and subscribe. It's going to help the channel grow. A lot of you have already kind of been subscribing and reacting, and I can't believe that there's people out there that actually care about this stuff and actually want to listen to me nerd out for a long time. I'm hoping to finish up this song pretty soon. Well, not pretty soon. I'm hoping to finish with a few more episodes, so we'll see what happens and we'll try to take it from there. And until next time, see ya.